This episode of Now This Is Lit is brought to you by Audible. Check the link in the description to get your first Star Wars audiobook free. Everyone loves free things. Click that link. Do it. This show is also brought to you by our patrons. If you want to support the show in a different way, with just $1 a month, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. You can get a sticker. You can get access to an exclusive show that we do every month that's wild and chaotic and fun and something you can only get by becoming a member of the Patreon. There'll be so many more perks very, very soon. But for now, do you want a sticker? Do you want a sticker that has a Now This Is Lit logo? Because it's fantastic and I love them. But I also want to give them away because there's just a stack of stickers on my desk. So if you want one, $1 a month. Patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. You're listening to Now This Is Lit, a podcast about Star Wars books, the people who make them, and the readers who just can't get enough of them. I'm your host, Meg Dowell. I use she, her pronouns. And today I have Justin from our Patreon on the show to talk about something I've wanted to highlight for a long time, which is YA and middle grade books, specifically in the High Republic. We are in a season of anticipation and reflection when it comes to the High Republic, so this is another chance for us to kind of talk about the best parts of it as we prepare for the end, whether we want to or not. Enjoy. On, please. Here we go. Do this, start this. Where's my checklist? Everything looks good. Really should do that before we start recording, but that's... Do I know how to podcast? I don't know. Have I been doing this long enough? I don't know.
How long have you been doing this? This podcast is what, 2 years now, right?
This podcast, 2 going on 3 this summer.
Almost 3.
Yeah,
Okay.
it doesn't feel like it, but I mean, I've been podcasting. Oh God, I don't even remember anymore. 5 years, maybe. Yeah, longer than that.
Okay.
Yeah, not always hosting, but you gotta start somewhere.
Right.
I'm gonna move this a little bit closer to my mouth. There we go. That sounds good. We like that. I'll start with this. How are you feeling about the High Republic almost ending? It's ending very soon as we're recording this, and I don't know how I feel about it.
Yeah, I am. I've really enjoyed this initiative, all the High Republic books. And actually it's really got me back into reading Star Wars books and novels, comic books. I didn't get into comic books until the High Republic comics, the Marvel line started. And so I'm kind of bummed that it's coming to an end, because it's been, I think what's been so fascinating for me is the authors, they've really stuck to the plan that they made years ago, and they are in constant communication. We've heard through some of your conversations with them, and then through some conversations I've heard on other podcasts and everything. And they've really stuck to this agenda, and it's been so, because of that, I think the stories have been, the connections have been so, made the stories that much better. And and what do we have 3 books, I guess, because we have Into the Light, and then I'm trying to remember Justina Ireland's book.
I should know this. I should know it.
Yeah, it's a 2-word book. It's not with her normal crew, so which, because usually with Justina, like it's Vernestra and Avon and then whomever is around, I guess. And I just finished Out of the Shadows, so I would maybe um, Chancey Yarrow, or maybe
Oh yeah.
no, Sylvester Yarrow. Sorry,
Yeah, yeah.
Chancey's gone,
Oh goodness. Ah!
but
Yeah.
you have those cast characters, and then you've got Charles Soule with
Yeah.
Trials, and the other thing that's kind of odd is that we have the outlier books, like the Acolyte books,
Mm,
that are kind
yeah.
of in between and thinking about where they're going to go,
Yeah.
and so yeah, I'm sad that this particular storyline is coming to a close. And like I'm sure they'll probably sneak some some stories within the time and
Mm,
everything,
yeah.
and kind of flesh out some stuff that's happening in other places of the galaxy. Um, but yeah, I'll be sad to see it go, but I have a large list of books that I have to start working on after this is done. So, like,
Oh yeah.
like I like the I listened to you guys talk about Rise and Fall of the Empire,
Mm,
and listened to uh Chris Kempshon DeVore the other day, catching up, and I mean, you wouldn't think that like sometimes like I don't know bibliogra was it not bibliography, but that style of
mm.
that style
Yeah, yeah.
is something that is maybe doesn't immediately grab people, but I think that the way that I understand that it's been written and everything, it just sounds really interesting
Yeah.
and
Mm.
right up my alley and everything.
Oh yeah.
So I'm excited about that. But yeah, I'm sad, but at the same time it's like looking forward to what's to come and everything.
Mm.
So
A Valiant Vow is
Valiant Vow. Yep.
Justina's last High Republic book. But yeah, no, I totally am kind of in the same kind of where you're at, where like sad that it's ending, but also like there's so many other things to read, like in Star Wars and outside of it,
Oh yeah,
if that's
yeah.
what you're into, which is a whole other problem. But
Right.
it's like because I'm pretty much caught up on canon novels, but like there's still a lot of Star Wars I haven't read. I haven't gone back and like I haven't read every single Legends book, and they're not
Right.
making new ones of those. So like eventually maybe I could. I pick up a new one every, or not new to me anyway, every once in a while, or when the Essential Legends collection comes out, and I'll try to like add another one to my list. But it's like there's Star Wars short stories I haven't read. There's reference
Hmm.
books that I have so many reference books behind me that I honestly have maybe flipped through once or twice. And I'm like, I want to take some time to like really sit down and go through them and really appreciate, because they're not just books, they're like art, there's
Right.
because
Right.
I love them. That's why I have them. And like the fact that I haven't had time to go through them, because like the thing about Star Wars books is like there's seemingly always a new one coming out. And I'm like, I don't want you to stop, but also can you slow down a
Slow
little
down.
bit? Um,
It's the truth.
it
Yeah.
is. And I am very interested to see like what the release schedule for Star Wars books is going to be without the High Republic, because we're very used to over the last 4 years.
Yeah.
Because of the High Republic, there being so many more Star Wars books, almost a Star Wars book every single month of the year, some years.
Hmm.
And yeah, so we'll see. But like, we'll obviously in a little bit get into like more stuff about the High Republic specifically and why we love it so much. But yeah, it's the characters, it's the work that the authors and everyone has put into it. But it's also just it's been such a long time. We've been with the High Republic for so long. I mean, we didn't know much about it, but we knew that something was happening even before the first books were announced. And it's been a long time, but all good things do eventually come to an end. And like you said, I do also think that at some point there will be more High Republic stories, maybe just not in a series, in a large initiative like this. A comic series or a comic one shot every once in a while, something like that. More books somewhere down the line. I could see them definitely doing that.
I I have to believe we'll get more Vernestra books,
Mm.
or
Oh yeah.
Vernestra stories at least. I think she is a pivot point in
Mm.
a lot of ways
Yeah.
to the direction that the Jedi go from the High Republic era into like the prequel era, I think that, and one of the things that, like I said, I was saying a couple minutes ago, I just finished Out of the Shadows, and the last thing that one of the last bits of that book is her quote conversation with Mori Santeca, and she gets this mysterious path, which I think we probably know what this path is going to be, and it will probably come out in the next, YA book, or hopefully the YA book, but definitely most likely the Charles Soule's book, that she's got this, she has this pathway that she's, aware of, and how they're going to address that. But thinking about it beyond that too is, um, she becomes a pivot point in like the Acolyte, like the way we see her in the Acolyte.
Yeah.
Like, and that's what's interesting to me reading some of the pre stuff for the Way Seekers, is she's still a Way Seeker, I guess, when we get into the pre-Acolyte book, that the kind of in between book. And something's going to happen in that time. I guess there's like a 20-year gap between that and the Acolyte, so it's going to be interesting to find out where her character is going to go once the High Republic ends. What does she learn? Because I mean, I think we have some good assumptions from what we saw, but there's a lot of story in there, and there's a lot of other characters too that I would really like to, especially from the YA books, from the junior novels, that I would like to get a little more, learn a little bit more about, because I feel more invested in them. I feel very much invested in those, and I'm kind of jumping into it like that kind of conversation, but like, um, I feel very much invested in their stories. It's like it's to me like, I started Light of the Jedi, it had already been out for like a year and a half, I think, at that point, and I had, you know, um, I had picked up on, a lot of, there were a lot of High Republic books, as you pointed out, like coming out at that point in time. And I'm like, well, I want to see, I hadn't really read a Star Wars book in a few years. I had, and I'll be honest with you, I'm not the best reader, so I use Audible, and I use live. I haven't used Audible as much recently, but I use Audible in the library. I get audiobooks, and so I'll listen to the books. And Star Wars books are always just so well produced for the most part. I mean, you get all the effects, and which in the readers, the narrators do such, really good job with what they do. But so I picked up Light of the Jedi, and listened to it, and it was a great book, but I didn't get into it the first time around. I didn't connect. There was so much that was like going on.
Yeah.
And some of the I liked some of the abilities, but it was just kind of, it was hard for me to connect. And then I got into the dark, the Claudia Gray book and as soon as I like Reith Silas is my favorite High Republic character. I'll just, and the reason, I liked Reith right away because I felt like I could relate to, like, I could remember being the age that they portray him to be, like kind of a late teenage, like it's almost like he's a senior in high school or something, and he's about to go to college.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things, he's learned a lot, but he's like, where am I going from here? And like, what am I doing from here? And I really connected to his character and Into the Dark, like Master Comac, and Orla Drenning, and Geode, and you know Affy, and just all the characters that were in that book, and like the things that they went through, and I just really felt connected to those characters. I wanted to know where they were going to go, and how they were going to, you know where was the path going to take them from there? And that's really, when I'm chatting about it with people online or um, anywhere that if I see people that are looking into it, say like, don't give these books a shot. The adult novels have a lot going for them, and they're all good, but I really feel like the young adult novels and even the junior novels for that matter are um, have been very interesting books and you know, very fun to read. And I'll stop there. Let you.
No, this is great. I think I promise I will let you like talk about yourself. We will get there.
Oh,
But we're just getting into it, and I love that.
mhm,
I think something that is missed a lot when a lot of Star Wars fans are differentiating between adult novels, young adult novels, middle grade novels is like something that's kind of magical about middle grade and young adult stories in all of Star Wars and especially in the High Republic is a lot of us are adults now and like
mhm,
we can relate to these characters and a lot of the things that they're going through and that's fine. But so many of us remember the more formative years of our lives when we were younger, when we were changing, when we were figuring out who we were, what we cared about, what mattered, what it was to live life and meet new people and whatever it might be. We remember that. And those years are so important to who we have since become. And of course, as an adult, you're still learning and growing and things like that. But as like
mhm,
when you're like a preteen or a teenager or a young adult, the things that happen to you change you and stick with you so much. And I think the reason that so many of us are drawn to these books is because that's the same case, kind of like you were talking about with these characters, is they're relatable because we've been there and we remember that. Um,
mhm.
even if, even if we haven't had the exact same experiences, we remember, struggling with relationships or struggling with, is this really the path that I want to go down? It's so important. And I think if more people took the time to really appreciate that side of it and give it kind of like a try and, pick up one of these books and kind of say, like, can you find yourself in any of these characters? The answer is probably going to be yes.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
yeah.
and we're gonna keep arguing pro YA young reader middle grade here. That's what this whole episode is about, and I'm so glad we're doing that. But just to start, it's so easy to find ourselves in these characters. And
Yeah.
as from a marketing standpoint, when you're just looking at publishing as a whole, there's a reason they divide these books into categories, right? You have your target audience, and that's who you're trying to sell to. Like that's why we have middle grade or young adult or adult novels. That's really why we do that.
Mhm,
But like it doesn't matter as much because especially what you see in the High Republic is across these three main categories, um, the same events are happening or different characters are reacting to the same events, even if you don't see them actually happening on the page, like you might in uh, a different book. And it's just all it is different characters experiencing the same thing in different ways. And I think that's just missed a lot, and that makes me really sad because I think if more people just gave them a chance, and
right.
yeah.
Yes. I like to bounce off that. I'm thinking about the Rising Storm,
Mm,
and then Race to Crash Point Tower,
mm,
like that. Daniel Jose Older
yeah.
followed up Kevin Scott, I believe, yeah, with the
Yeah.
Rising Storm. And if you're reading Rising Storm, and they talk about this kid um, that helped Ty York
Mm,
in the jail to break out of jail so that they could, in turn try and help what the chaos that's going on Valo. And I mean, you could brush by the kid
yeah.
and just not think anything of it, but not know the story behind. Um, oh gosh, why am I blanking? He's such a pivotal character too.
Yeah, I know. I'm
Uh,
really bad at thinking of character names in the moment. I know who you're talking about.
yeah, because he's so critical to going forward, like in the High Republic Adventure comics, and then he's the great foil to Wreath on Midnight Horizon.
Mhm.
Why am I slipping on it? But if you don't pick up on it, because I can think of Lula Tulia Solar, however you say her
Yeah.
last name, and they team up in the Race to Crash Point Tower, and you get more backstory of how he ended up there in the first place, and then how he helped Ty,
Yeah.
um, and there's just all like you said, the some of the details, like some of the juicier details are in some of these books, and
Yeah.
they're allowed to kind of flesh out those details in the books and get beyond, like, I mean, one of the things, like I said, that I was dealing with Light of the Jedi and then with Rising Storm, um, was the chaos of everything that was going on around
Mm.
and the bouncing from character to character to character. And it was nice, it was refreshing in a way to be able to get into like one character's point of view, and you're seeing, what you get behind their eyes and see what they're seeing that's going on Valo or
Yeah.
on the Maxine station or
Yeah.
or in Corellia, like later on,
Mm.
um, and just all the, multiple planets and everything that they end up going. And it's those details and then how they're responding is just it's that's what's and that's what really has drawn me into the book so much more and has made the adult novels, especially getting into phase three, I've been much more connected to the adult novels. And I think that's part of like one of my favorite authors from the series. Um, I think that, you know, I've really felt connected to those. And I will say, well, maybe I'll stop there. I was going to talk about Path or Tears of the Nameless is probably my favorite book
Oh, it's
in
so
the
good.
end.
It's so
It's
good.
such a great book.
Mm.
It's so I would recommend that book to anybody just because it was maybe to a certain extent you need a little bit of backstory
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
of
yeah.
what's happened. Like you need to know what's happened to Reith between, you know, his first connection in Into the Dark until that point and know
Mhm.
where he's been.
Yeah.
Um, but how it was such a heartwarming book to me in the end.
Yeah.
It was like it's almost like we're back. We're back,
Yeah.
but just the story, and it's George Mann. It's just the way he
Yeah.
wrote that. It's just so well done. I felt so like connected to Breathe especially, but Amadeo,
Mhm.
and their kind of storylines is how they're going through, and Breathe's able to help him,
Yeah.
and they're able to help each other, and then it's I could sing praises for that book for
Yes.
days, but
Yes.
it's just such a great book. And but yeah, I do. That's what I love about those books, the YA books, the junior novel books, is like you get more from those books, more details about what's happening, and you get a clear sense, like that Avar's doing this here, that Elzar's doing that there, or that Stellan's like scout, like upset with Avar for doing, for going off on this fool's quest to try and track down the Nile. Um, unfortunately, like and then how things kind of fall apart. But what's nice is like when you get into the details of like those other books, you better understand the gravity of the situation, I
Yeah.
guess, is that they're in, you know.
Yeah. 100%. And you'd mentioned how like reading Light of the Jedi for the first time for you was kind of a struggle because there was so much going on. And a lot of people have said that like they also struggled with that book because there are a lot of characters, there's a lot of things that you kind of have to like absorb very fast, then you're moving on to the next thing. And to that I would say, yes, of course, because I also had that problem. I had to read it, I think, a couple times. Um,
Hmm.
but if you're gonna start the High Republic, if you haven't yet and you're listening and you're on the fence, if you're gonna start it and you're reading Light of the Jedi and you feel a little bit overwhelmed, instead of going straight to the next adult novel, which would be The Rising Storm in the series, if you need a little bit of a, I like to call them palate cleansers sometimes. If you
Hmm.
need a minute to kind of like continue the story, but maybe not as overwhelmingly, go to a young reader book, go to a young adult book because they're just as action packed, they're just as significant, they're just as even sometimes even more emotional as the
Right.
adult novels, but they're on a little bit of a smaller scale. There's fewer characters to kind of keep track of. Um, it's still everything you love about the High Republic, everything you love about Star Wars, but just it's a little bit easier to absorb. And that's not to say that like the writing isn't still good, or anything
Right.
like that, but it's not quite as chaotic. And I say chaotic in a loving way,
Oh
um,
yeah, yeah,
but yeah, that's
for sure.
when you said that, that was one of the first things I thought of. I was like, that's why you gotta go to, if you read a lot of the Jedi and you're like, that was a lot, read A Test of Courage after that, because then you get to meet Vernestra
Right.
and other characters that become important later on. And it's covering the same themes. It's around the same time, but it's a little bit easier to breathe as you're reading it.
Right.
And it's still tragic because terrible things are still happening. And that's, I think, um, George Mann has talked about this, and I could sing his praises all day long because first of all, no matter what he tackles in Star Wars, he just manages to nail it every single time. He's done
Every
like
time.
I think a little bit of everything at this point.
Uh-huh.
Whatever kind of book for whatever reader, all kinds of different things. And like he's just so good at telling stories. And one of the things he's talked about, having being one of the few Star Wars authors who's gone from comics to young reader or middle grade to young adult to adult novel. He's done all of it. And one of the things that he's talked about is like it's the same, you're covering the same events, the same story. And it's just, you just have to think about who is telling that story and whose perspective and how they might see those events a little bit differently and how it affects them. That's all that's really different. Um, who is reading it might be different, the characters might be different, but it's still Star Wars. It's still, it's still the Great Disaster. It's still the Republic Fair. It's still the fall of Starlight Beacon. Sorry, spoilers, but if you
Oh yeah.
but if you didn't know already,
We're
that's
deep
just
into
what happens.
three at this point. So
Yes. Yeah. Um,
that was a struggle. I'll be honest with you. For me, like you had at the point that picked up, they were just starting phase two.
mhm.
Like, and I think maybe Convergence was out. Path of Deceit, another favorite of mine, was
Ooh,
out. Um, and and then to find out, well, that takes place 100, 200 years before
yeah.
the phase one, phase three are happening. I'm like, well, that's curious. I wonder why. And then that got me thinking, and that's part of the reason why I'm going back through. I feel like I pile drive through, because I pile drive through reading, getting caught up with everything. And I decided I wanted to go back, and I'm kind of doing a weird hybrid thing where I'm reading reading the phase one, phase two books, and I'm listening to the phase one books
I
to
love that.
catch back up. I'm kind of doing both at the same time.
Yeah.
And I got to thinking the other day about George Mann and the quest for the hidden city,
Mm,
and there's like a through line to
mm,
me between his in all his stories, and I really need to go back and read his short stories that were in Star Wars Insider.
Oh
But
yeah, yeah.
there seems to me a through line from is Quest for the Hidden City the first book that he did in the High Republic?
Oh,
Because he started that and then he did Battle of Jeddah, right?
yes. There's been so many.
So many books, it's hard to
There's
keep
been
track.
so many. Maybe because I'm trying to remember because when did they start bringing more authors on?
Phase two was when they introduced Zoraida Cordova, who she's also done a lot of, I think she's done one of each type, I think,
Mm,
at this point too.
yeah.
Zoraida, Lydia King, although I think it was, and then George Mann and Kevin Scott kind of did the young adult and the junior novels, I think. Oh, Tessa Gratton did The Quest for Planet X,
Yes,
and
yes, yes.
Justine Ireland and Tessa did Path of Deceit.
Yes.
So I do think it was Quest for the Hidden City. What I
Mm,
was trying to get to. So George Mann does Quest for the Hidden City,
mhm.
Battle of Jeddah. Then he goes into phase three and with the Eye of Darkness.
Such a good book.
And it was another great book.
Yeah.
And then Tears of the Nameless to like, I guess, round it out for him.
Yeah.
And there's a connect, like, I had a question for you. I
Yes,
know
yes.
about did we get our first exposure of the Blight in Quest for the Hidden City?
Mm,
There's a talk about like on the planet Autobus that has been kind of destroyed by, what the people on Glow, I think it's, yeah, or is it Gloam, the planet Gloam, the
mm, mm,
sister planet's been destroyed from
mm,
um, all the mining and stuff that they did to try and power the planet, the sister planet. I think it's Gloam is the planet that was
mm,
basically destroyed, but Autobus is suffering because of the losses. And he mentions in there talking about it's blighted and the
mm.
blight of the planet. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. It's like because at the end of Eye of Darkness, like, isn't, one of the things that Markion is testing the blight to try
Yeah.
and figure out what can I do with this? And
Mm,
then we get to Tears of the Nameless, and they've now figured out how they can tackle the blight,
mm.
or they think they know. And now, well, there's other aspects of the story that I don't want to get too into, but we're trying to avoid spoiling too many things, but
Yeah.
especially since that's a fairly new book. But
Yeah.
um, I thought about that as like it's like he's connected. He's really truly connected like the phase
Mm,
two into like the current period, the phase one, phase three periods, connecting all that, like,
yeah.
and it just like thinking about that, just like wow, it's like you wouldn't have gotten that had you not read the had you
Yes.
not read the middle grade book, or you
Yes.
hadn't read the young adult novel, you wouldn't know, you wouldn't be aware of that. It's like, oh, this blank just all of a sudden appears because Markion's kicking his boots around and on the planet and everything. It's like, or that's, uh, I'm kind of poo-pooing what he did, but basically
Mm,
it's like it making those connections is like just further has made me love these stories
yeah.
just because of those connections, those types of connections and everything. And it's a lot of books. I think that's another thing I've heard a lot
Yeah.
of people is like, it's a lot of books. It's like,
Yeah.
why you're telling me I should go out and read two more books per like, and I'm like, yeah, but you don't realize what you're missing.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
if you don't do it, you're like, they talk about it in the adult novels,
Yeah.
but if you really want to, like, you miss great characters like Solange Show, who I think is really kind of the embodiment of. Oh, that's another thing that gets connected. I think. But Solange Show is like to me like almost like the Captain America, and I mean, and I'm not trying to bar just because she has a shield, but like, you know, her first instinct is defense.
Yeah.
which is what whenever like growing up, I always thought of the Jedi's you know defense.
Yeah.
They were there to protect the people, and you know, unfortunately, like for Luke, and in his case, is like, well, his own father is trying to track it down, and and whereas with like someone like Salandra, and like how Reith seems to be, is he's about protection. He doesn't like to they don't like to get into fights unless
Yeah.
they absolutely are forced to.
Yeah.
And but you miss out on characters like her, like
Yeah.
Rupert, or
Uh,
um, which in it, or like even like the quote unquote like commoners, like you have Das Lethbrook, and you have, is it Sky
yes.
Graph?
Yes.
You miss out on some very interesting characters, or like Xylan Graph was first introduced
Oh,
in Out of the Shadows.
one of my favorite characters.
Xylan,
Yes.
yeah,
So
he's a
good.
tricky character.
Yeah. Yeah.
um Kind of toes the line. I go from not liking him to being like, he's just a scoundrel.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. He's complicated. He's
Right.
complicated, and
Very
I like
complicated.
that. Um, so when you sent me that question earlier and you were like, did George, did he do it? Did he mention the blight possibly in this book? And I sat there for a minute and I was like, I missed that. I completely missed that. I mean, it's been a while since I read the book, but you said that
Oh
and I
yeah,
was
yeah,
like,
sure.
well, now I want to go back and read that because I may have reading it the first time, why would you pick up on that? Because obviously the blight hasn't been
Yeah,
formally introduced yet. But I
right.
completely like didn't even think about that. And that you're right. That is so like, and they kind of have done this, throughout the High Republic, probably in ways we haven't even noticed yet because it's not
Hmm.
over yet. And these last three books I think will um really pack a punch. And I'm not
Yeah.
ready.
Oh
It's
yeah.
fine. But yeah, I think like they're so good at that. They're so good at
Hmm.
like planting these little seeds. And like because you haven't read what comes later, you don't know that that's a reference. But then you
Right.
get to the later books and you're like, "Wait, I remember in Quest of the Hidden City that this happened." It's so cool. Like you brought that up and I was like, "I can't believe that." The amount of like planning that has gone into this entire series. I don't know how they do it.
I don't either.
I don't know.
I
Like,
don't know. Like Daniel Jose Older, for instance, was like tackling. Well, I think he's bowed out of the novel. Like he's not doing like the young adult or junior novels.
mm,
And I mean, I know the initiative's over now, but you know, being able to do like the High Republic adventures, which I was going to say, like, I would kind of group into this because they
yeah,
tend to
yeah,
be kind of the fun, they're not there's a lot of there's a lot of humor in those stories, but
yes,
there's a lot of heart in those stories too. And
yes.
I do kind of group them with like the young adult and the
Mm,
junior novels because
yeah.
they kind of lean to that, you know, that crowd, that audience, and to be able to keep track of what the other authors are doing. I don't know how they couldn't have that without having the whiteboard, and without having
Yeah.
like a Google Docs or whatever it is that they're using to like
Yes.
keep track of like, oh, this character was in this, and this is where they are, this is where I finished with them. And um, it's really amazing, like to be able to work with that, and to work as a team together. And I mean, I have to, I guess, what is it? Michael Seglain was kind of, you know, helped corral like bring everybody together. And I really applaud the work that he's
Yes.
done, and that everybody's done to try
Yeah.
and bring all these audiences together. And I mean, because this is what Star Wars meant for everybody.
Yes.
It's meant to achieve, I mean, it's it's meant to appeal to a broad audience. And there's something for kids, there's something for adults, there's something for everybody in between. And
Mm,
it, we are. you know, they're such fun, inviting and enjoyable stories to like, not kind of, yet that kind of take you away from like what you may be dealing with now, and just to kind of enjoy a little bit of time, just like getting away from things and everything. So, but
Yes. Yeah, I remember when they first announced that it was going to be an initiative that kind of told stories to different audiences and in different mediums. I remember immediately thinking that was so cool because at least recently they haven't really done anything like that where this overarching story is following different characters that, are more accessible to all readers. It's I think it's such an important thing, and that's kind of what breaks my heart sometimes about um people who kind of just dismiss the books for younger readers. It's one thing if you like try to read them, they're not really for you. Like that's fine. Like if it's not like the kind of book that you like, there's nothing wrong with that.
right.
But if you're not even gonna try it, if you're kind of just gonna say, "Oh, that's for kids, I'm not gonna read that." Like you said, you don't need to. This is the hard thing, is you don't need to read them. Like you can get technically the whole story through the adult novels and you would be okay. But you're missing out on so much. You're missing out on so many fun characters. You're missing out on like all the drama sometimes
Hmm.
between people. You're just missing out on so much. And again, like it's never, oh, you have to read this, because I would never tell anyone that they have to read everything, because it is a lot of books. I compare it sometimes to like the New Jedi Order, which is 19 books. Like if you read them as they were coming out in the 2000s, that's one thing. But if you're someone like me who just finished reading them earlier this year and you're trying to go one after the other and read all 19, that's too many books. That's too many books in a series. Not that it wasn't good, but it's just like uh it doesn't it feels too intimidating, right? And so like I'm never going to tell anyone like, oh, you have to read all these. But even if you, up to this point, have only read the adult novels in the High Republic, it's not too late to go back and
Oh,
try
right.
some of the other ones. Like, it might also even, like, I think it's a good time to do it now, because this will come out before all the rest of the books are out. So High Republic's not over yet as you're listening to this, but if you need a little bit of a refresher on like the first phase, because that was a long time ago, and if you haven't reread any of
Yeah.
them, go back to some of the young adult books or the middle grade books, and like it might center you in like, oh right, this thing happened or these characters met or something like that.
Right.
It's not too late. You don't have to read them in order. I mean, like you can't start like you can't start with phase three like that. You're going to be very confused. But like
Oh,
if
yeah.
you've already
Yeah.
read up to like what's come out, you can always go back. And Star Wars is very good at telling stories out of order anyway. That's just kind of how it is.
Yeah.
So, it's not too late. That's what I
I
say.
remember being, and this is going back into my history of with Star Wars, is
Yes.
being a young, very very young. I mean, I remember seeing Return of the Jedi with my dad as a 4-year-old,
Oh,
and thinking that, why is it say, well, I didn't know at the time, but my dad was very quick to point out that this is episode 6,
mm,
and I'm like, well, I knew what 5 was because I had the little, the little golden book with the
yes.
record and everything, and I remembered that, and I knew about Star Wars, but so this is 4, 5, and 6, and um, to your point, it's like the next step was to go to 1, 2, and 3, and which, okay, and but yeah, Star Wars does have a tendency to kind of go out of order. Like I guess Old Republic came out, from a, well, I guess when technically would you say the Old Republic came out? Because I guess
Mm,
Tales of the Jedi, the comic line, came out,
yeah.
in the mid '90s. Now that I've
Right.
learned that recently.
Right.
Um, but yeah, to your point about just the High Republic books, to go back, like I think if you wanted to not have you want to remind yourself or refresh yourself of what's been going on. The young adult books and the middle grade books are great books to kind of catch up, especially like, with some of these characters that will carry on. Vernestra, especially, primarily resides in the young adult and the junior and the middle grade books. Um, and you really get, as you follow her story along, um, you really get a better grasp of where she is going, like you get a feel for. And I think there's still more story to tell about her, as we get up to the Acolyte period. It'll be interesting to see how, if she'll be in Into the Light. I hope so. I almost feel like she has to be.
Mm-hmm.
If she's in Trials of the Jedi, I feel like that probably has to be one of the, I guess, the nine. Um, it'll be very interesting to see what path she takes. But I'm also like, you don't get Reef unless you don't get someone like Reese Silas or Amadeo, if you don't get into those books. And they're I think people, especially after Tears of the Nameless, how important Reith is to the grand scheme of what is happening with the High Republic and where it's going now. He's such an important character. It's hard for me to think, why would they leave him mostly pretty much out of the adult books? He's only, what was it? He was mentioned in, um, oh gosh,
Yeah, I'm trying to remember.
Temptation of the Force. Yeah, I
Yes.
think he was mentioned briefly, very briefly in that. I don't think he was mentioned in Eye of Darkness. So yeah, it's been kind of like, but you get to Tears of the Nameless and the things that he's involved in, and his work with Aslan Rel, and which Aslan's a character that appeared in Path of Deceit first, in the beginning, and so um, he's just such a, to me, critical character, and I really would like to know where he will go,
Oh,
assuming nothing bad happens. Knock on wood. That's the one sad thing about the High Republic is at least Cavan's not writing the book.
yeah, but Charles Soule is.
Yeah,
I mean, do you remember Light of the Jedi? Do you remember those first like 8
yeah.
chapters?
Well, so having just reread Light of the Jedi, I enjoyed it the second time. And now, but like, yeah, he had the he and
Yeah.
Kevin Scott have an unfortunate reputation for like going Game of Thrones on them, but um yeah, they're it all the same. It's like I'm invested in their stories and where they're going, and I really hope that we get more about their characters in the future. Even if even if it's a little bit, it'd be great to learn, like, a little bit more, like where they go from here. Do they have a Padawan? Do they, does he take over the library? We'll see. I don't know, but
Oh, I would love that. Yeah, either there has to be a really, really good epilogue or they have to bring these characters back
right,
in somehow,
yeah,
some way. And I think that is the most heartbreaking part of us coming to the end of all of it, is like we're gonna have to say goodbye to these characters, maybe not forever, and hopefully not forever, but at least like we're not going to be getting a new book featuring them like a couple times a year anymore.
right,
And like I think it's really a testament to how good the writing has been across this entire series, where we've all fallen in love with these characters so much that to not ever see them again would be so sad.
yeah,
Um and I'm sure they have plans. I'm sure they do, because like once fans latch onto a character, like they're going to come back at some point. That's like an obligation that they now have,
right,
And I'm not mad about it, but it's
right,
like these characters they're not just so well written, but if you follow them across all the books that they're in, I'm thinking of like Reith especially. Like think of where he started, where like he's like, I don't want to go out into the universe fighting people. Like I want to stay in the
right,
library and do my thing. But then not spoiling too much, when you get to his storyline in where we're at in phase 3, it kind of starts to come full circle, and you're like, oh, like he figured out how to use his strengths and his like love for like knowledge and research and figuring things out, and it might actually save the entire galaxy. Like that's
Yeah.
wild to me. Like,
Right.
and they managed to, obviously you have to have a plan when you do that, and they knew kind of where all these characters were going to end up to a point, but like to be able to, that is like the reward, if you will, of like sticking with all of the books, is you do get that payoff of like, oh, I understand why this character doing this thing is so significant.
Mhm.
Sometimes doing homework is a good thing. And again, you don't have to, again, it's hard because I'm like, you don't have to read everything, but like you really should. You should know, like, for me, the middle grade books in the High Republic have been my favorite. They've been the ones that have made me the most emotional. They've been the
Mhm.
ones that I've attached to these characters probably a little bit too much. And I mean, the nice thing about characters in middle grade books is like if they're the main character, they're not going to hurt them because they can't
Right.
do that to kids. You can't traumatize children. You
Right.
I mean, you can, but like you shouldn't. So there's
Right.
that. But like I just think like there's something so special about them and like seeing their perspective on things. I don't now remember which book it was. There are a lot of books in the High Republic. It's hard to remember what they're all
Oh
named,
yeah.
who wrote them. But there's one middle grade book where there's a point when one of the Jedi Masters that is with them um dies. And they kind of have this moment where they're like, oh, they're one
Escape
with
from
the
ballet,
Force now.
maybe.
Maybe? I think so. And they're just like, oh, they're one with the Force. And they kind of like take that moment to process that. And then they keep going. And I'm like, that is how a youngling or a Padawan like sees the universe and like processes these terrible things that are happening. And I'm like, that
Right.
is so important because imagine being like a kid and you're seeing like these other kids like deal with something really hard, and you're like, oh, like they acknowledge that it happened, but they're still gonna be okay. And like imagine, like I didn't have that in Star Wars as a kid. And so like now I'm like I didn't have that, but kids now will have that. And that's why they
Right.
matter so much to me. It's so important.
Right. Yeah, to be able to just like have that and be able to share it now is it's like one of the things that I try, I try to do with my own kids is like, I pump these books as like, I really should check these out because I think you'd understand. You may appreciate them. I mean, I appreciate them and I love them, but you may like them even more than I do. And you know, but they're just to your point, it's like they're not going, that the kids in these books, the younglings in these books are going to go through trials. They're going to go through
Yeah.
their own things, but they're going to come out. And now that I think about it, I think it was Beware the Nameless that one of the younglings, in protecting the others, the
Yeah.
master ended up um, becoming one with the Force,
Yeah.
but like to hear, like to read through and how they are um, processing that,
Yeah.
how they're processing that information and then using it to improve, or how do they, how they respond and everything, and it's they're just great reads for that, and they're not like they're palate cleansers as you put,
Yeah.
they're basically like fun reads to like that tell you more about what's going on, but
Yeah.
also are fun and good to read. So
Yeah. Yeah. And they're also very good for like, you get like the main events of all the things that are happening in the High Republic in the adult novels, and like those are all very important things, and it's very good. But like it's nice to also have the story feel a little bit bigger when you kind of just go to somewhere else in the galaxy and see what other people are doing, what other Jedi are dealing with somewhere else, which is what ends up happening in a lot of the middle grade books, especially, is like it's just on a different planet with seemingly unrelated characters, but it just makes the entire story feel so much richer because you're just seeing different ways that the Nile are just ruining lives.
Right.
And like it's one thing to see it from like the perspective of like Avar and Elzar and all that, which is important and we love them. But to see it from these little younglings and they're like, you know, they understand what's going on. They just have a different way of processing it and dealing with it. And they could be just on some um other outpost or other planet somewhere else, but like it still reaches them. It still matters. They still want to be Jedi and help however they can. And like
Hmm.
the morals of all those stories always end up being like just because we're younglings doesn't mean we can't help save the galaxy. And I love that so much.
Right. Yeah. It's and I think one of the things I was thinking about too was like Emery.
Mm,
Emery Canteris is
yes.
like a big character um in all of Vernestra's stories, and how he deals with the Force, how the Force impacts him, and how like it's I don't want to like equate it to autism, but it's like one of the things that you when you read he's overwhelmed
Yeah.
when there's a lot of emotion, and there's a lot of emotion in
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
books, a lot of a storm of emotions, not to borrow, but like um and how he deals with that, and you can kind of like see how that, the same sort of thing happened to people, kids in the real world,
Mm,
adults in the real world for that
yeah.
matter too. It's like, how they adapt to like in, loud environments for it. In his case, like his loud thoughts and everything. And
Mm,
you see how he progresses from, from the first book to I believe the last mentioning was Defy the Storm, maybe.
think so.
Like, and
Yeah.
he's he's on this one planet trying to help other people, and
Mm,
you know you got this whole side quest. Yeah, it's like a separately from what Vernestra and Avon and that crew, they're trying. Vernestra's trying to track him down and doesn't know if he's alive or not, and
mm,
to find out how far he's come. It's rewarding in that regard too. That's what's so great about, like, it's when you understand where the character began and then where they are. It's so, like with Emery, I was just so like it moved me that he
mm,
had gotten to what he was doing, and he was and clearly it had such a big impact on Vernestra because she struggled.
yeah.
She constantly is concerned about how she's doing training when she's so young,
Yeah.
compared to other people. And it's it would just be like, as a senior, like if you're a high school senior, for instance, and you're trying to mentor with, somebody in middle school or elementary school, trying to help them, and maybe you don't feel like you're reaching them. Maybe it's like, maybe it's a struggle, but then to see them, you know, down the line, and they're actually demonstrating, maybe it's not something you were directly working on, but maybe it's just how taught them, how you were mentoring them, and if you were, you know being, treating them respectfully and doing the best you can and showing the effort, and then you see that same effort down the line. It's just that's what's also been so great, is just the authors being able to make those, you know um taking things that are going on in the real world and applying them into this universe, and giving us a point of view that maybe many of us blow past when we, are reading adult novels. It's like, it's not that they don't go into them, but, there's a lot of other things that are going on. And, that's the one beauty of these other stories is, the young adult and the middle grade books, is you get more of the real, quote unquote, real life stories,
Yeah.
the back, like the from struggling to excelling, basically. And like thinking about Wreath again, with from all the, it's like he lost his mentor. All right, I'm sorry, his master died in, the fight, like in Light of the Jedi.
Mm.
So he has to get a new one. Then his master leaves him.
God.
Poor Comac, for all that he's gone through, I guess, and just but to Wreath, all the stuff that he's gone through, it's like he's lost. It's almost like he lost his the abandoned, how he adjusted to being essentially abandoned,
Yeah.
and the emotions behind that, and it just seemed like I really felt like the authors that all have been a part of his story have done a great job of emoting him and emoting the characters around him, and make getting I mean, getting you invested. I know I'm like a broken record with some of the things, but it's just like I can't help but think about it. He's just it's the way that the structures of the stories have been is just like you really feel like you connect to these characters, and especially with the characters in the young adult novels and the middle grade novels, you really connect to them in ways that you you don't necessarily get in the adult novels. So that's, if you want, like, there's just, I don't know, they're just such fun stories, and it's just nice to have something like that and not feel like, crowded, or I don't know, like just overwhelmed with what the other stuff going on. So
Yes, exactly. I mean, there's a little something for everyone, and that's what's been so good about the High Republic, all the books, but especially these. You did have one more question that you asked me.
yeah,
And I don't want to forget that one before we have to stop talking about these books, which I could talk about them for hours, but
yeah,
you know.
yeah, for
Um,
real.
yeah, so remind me what that second
So
question was. Yes.
little, I I was curious, Alicia Zeveron. So
Mm,
for people that may not know, she's the mother character in the Phase 2
mm,
part of the High Republic. So she's introduced in Path of Deceit, and then she's in Path of Well, she's in all four of the main books. I guess she's in the middle grade books too, to a certain extent. Not in Quest for Hidden City, but in Quest for Planet X, I think one of the characters is a Path member, Path the
mhm.
Up in Hand member that
Yeah.
they coordinate with. But um, how did she become aware of the rods, these powerful rods that are controlling the Nameless? How did she become aware of that? When you
Yeah.
read her story I'm slipping on the book, but it was in between phase. It's like stories that had a phase 1 and phase 2 characters. You get
Yes,
a
yes.
big hash out story of Marta, which
Yeah.
Marta Rose, one of my favorite characters, and
Yes.
like her, how she is. She went from being someone innocent, with a strong ideals about her and feelings about the Force, to what she became, and then how that has traveled down her bloodline to Markion. You see a lot of, or Marchion, or however you say it. I don't know. Mark Thompson says it differently every
He
single
does.
time, it seems like. But um, and like how her, like, I was fascinated by her character, and
Mm,
like, and especially with the road name and everything, about, like, with them, it's like, oh, how did they get from in point A to point B? And it's clear in, like, her story how, you know ha, they're a race that was already, like, other beings in the galaxy didn't trust them, didn't like them, so they were discriminated against even that far back. So there's almost like they always had their backs against the wall from the
mhm.
beginning, and just how their characters flesh out. But yeah, back to that collection of stories. Um, one of the stories was talking about how when the mother was not the mother at that point. She was just really kind of a thief, stealing objects. And um, we knew that she has some force ability, but it's not as strong as her sister was, so she wasn't taken as a Padawan learner. But apparent and how that impacted what she did, further on, how that influenced what she did. But how did she become aware? As I'm very curious about, obviously she was aware that it existed, that they
Yeah.
existed, but how did she become aware that they exist? Because it seems like something that was lost to time.
Yeah.
They, um, some of the Pathfinders that were out before even the events of um, on Donna in phase 2. Um, they didn't really mention it that much other than the Echo Stones in the one comic, but one shot comic, I
Yeah.
think. So where, it's just curious. It's something curious to me is like this technology that basically disappeared, and then suddenly, how did she become aware that it was there?
Yeah.
Um,
That's also interesting to me. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if we got more of that at some point, if more of her story was told in some form. Either that or we learn more about it in a comic or in any of the books that are still coming out, or it's just one of those things that remains a mystery, which is frustrating. But that also
right.
leaves, the chance for us to kind of like wonder and speculate and think like, oh, maybe this happened or this happened. And I think it's really interesting because like how did that happen? I never really thought of that too much either. You've asked really good questions that have made me like really want to I wish I could go back and read the whole thing, and maybe I will. Maybe once all of it's over, I'll just like start over from the beginning. I don't know.
Well, it'll always be there, so you
Yes.
can take your time getting through it. So,
That is the beautiful thing about Star Wars books is as
right.
evidenced by the shelves behind me, once they're here, they never leave. This has been such a good conversation, and I'll tell you, I've wanted to talk about YA and middle grade books, as like an entire episode on the show for such a long time, and it just happened that you and I were able to connect and do that through the High Republic specifically, which is a really good way to do it because I think these are some of the best ones that we've
Mm.
gotten in a very long time, if not just ever.
Oh
Um,
yeah, very much.
and I'm just so glad that you were able to just bring so many really good insights and really good questions, and that we could
Thank you.
just sit here and talk about something that we love and has just, been with us for so long. It matters to me and it matters to you and it matters to everyone listening. At least I hope so. Otherwise, I don't know why you're listening, but that's fine. Um, Genuinely, thank you so much
Well,
for
thank you.
reaching out, for wanting to do this, and for just bringing all of your enthusiasm for the High Republic, which I knew you would anyway, but it makes for such a good conversation about so many books that I think a lot of people have discovered, but many more could discover. And back to something you mentioned very briefly, that I wanted to uh, get back to just really quick, is you mentioned that you listen to a lot of Star Wars audiobooks, and I would highly recommend to anyone, if audiobooks are something you wanted to try or something that you already listened to anyway, with other books, try the Star Wars books, try the High Republic. They are unlike most of the audiobooks that you've probably listened to already. There's music, there's sound effects, there's just really, really good narration across the board. I think like they have just really, really good narrators. And then if you even get around to listening to the audio dramas and it's an entire cast
Oh yeah.
performing this book. We didn't even get to talk about that. I'll talk about that
No,
at
we
some
did
point
not.
too. But highly recommend. I wanted to say that because like I wanted to second your plug for audiobooks, because that's how I listen to most of my books too at this point, because it's a really good way to absorb a book. And I think if it's your thing, if it's something that you're into, highly recommend. But anyway, before I get on an
Definitely,
entire
definitely.
tangent of audiobooks, which I could talk about them forever too. Um, yeah, I hope that you enjoyed being here as much as I had enjoyed having you here. And we'll have to do it again sometime because this was really, really fun. Maybe
I
when the High
would,
Republic is over, we will come back and mourn together.
yeah, I would love to. And thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. I'm very passionate about the High Republic,
Yes.
and it's just um, it really has reinvigorated my interest in, especially it's almost like I hate to say that I'm almost exclusively Star Wars books at this point, but like, and it's not that I've been disappointed with any of the shows or the other content. It's just, I've gotten so much joy out of
Yes.
reading the books and the comics that it's just like, you know, we can complain, oh, well, we're not getting another show. Well, until Andor comes out, but like we're not getting another show or movie for a while after that. And it's like, well, we got plenty of books
Yep.
that we can go back. And I wholeheartedly agree with you on the audiobooks. They're a joy. They're not, some can be at times a little overwhelming with the sound effects, but I mean, like people like Mark Thompson just do such a great job of reading, and their vocal characterizations, they do a great job. And anybody that you get, and like they try to embody, you really feel like they're trying to embody the characters that they're speaking for. And so it makes it so quick to get through too. It really like you'll finish you may be, you know you may be concerned like, oh, Light of the Jedi is a really long book to get through, but like those hours, it's like 10 hours, but I mean, if you're listening to it like, or 10 or 14, I don't know. They seem to range between the 10 and like the young adult, and the adult novels tend to range in that 10 to 14 hour range. But they go by so quickly.
They do.
And if you're someone like I was for a long time until the pandemic, a commuter, you zone out of like if you're traveling in DC traffic, or you're traveling in New York or anywhere that is a heavy like traffic area, or you're traveling long distance, they're a lot of fun to listen to, and you never feel like you're learning what's going on, and enjoying it, and not worrying about like the slow traffic in front of you or this and that and everything. So I do, yeah, definitely recommend the audiobooks. So they're just a lot of fun.
Yes, absolutely. We'll have to talk about audiobooks exclusively on an episode at some point, because they're very good. Anyway, I keep wanting to go back. We're not going back. Yeah, this has been so great, and I hope everyone is enjoying their Star Wars reading as always. And the High Republic isn't over yet, but it will be soon. So that's why we're giving you more episodes about it now, so we can all prepare for the end, and then we can all get together on a live stream and just cry. That sounds like a very terrible and also great idea. Maybe I'll consider it. But yeah, thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yep, thank you.
Now This Is Lit is part of the Faraway Fandom Network. It is produced by Devor Montum and written, hosted, and edited by me. Jose Jimenez designed our podcast art. You can keep up with the show on Substack and Now This Is Lit, and find the show wherever you get your podcasts. There are so many ways you can support the show, and all of those ways are linked in the show description. The newest way is to become a member of our Patreon. For $1 a month, you can get access to an exclusive show and a sticker. And if we get 500 people to support the Patreon per month, I can hire an editor. That would be great for me, and maybe for you too. So if you'd like to support the show with just $1 a month, you can do it that way. Or you can just keep listening and sharing the episodes. That is also helpful, and I appreciate it. For more book reviews and Star Wars Book Celebration, follow Star Wars Book Reviews on Instagram and TikTok.